All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar training titled What's New in MAGS 12.0. My name is Catherine Pembroke. I'm the Administrative and Training Coordinator for the Maryland State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy. Now, we will be releasing a new version of the Maryland Automated Guidelines System, which we commonly refer to as MAGS, as well as the Guidelines Calculator tool on July 1. Now, many of the updates and enhancements being deployed are in response to feedback that has been compiled from MAGS users. So I'm sure many of you will be happy with the changes you're about to see. Now, the purpose of this webinar is to highlight the key updates and enhancements that are most relevant to states' attorneys, parole and probation investigators, and defense attorneys who initiate the sentencing guidelines worksheet in MAGS and also calculate sample guidelines using the guidelines calculator tool. Now, I will be demonstrating how to initiate a sentencing guidelines worksheet in MAGS while also highlighting some new features along the way in the new 12.0 application. So even though this demonstration will be in MAGS, for any defense attorneys who may be attending today, or really anyone who utilizes the guidelines calculator tool to calculate sample guidelines, these changes that you're seeing in MAGS will also be applied to the guidelines calculator tool. Now, a separate training is being held for judges and their designees, and will focus on the updates and enhancements related more so to entering sentence information and submitting the guidelines worksheet. So if you're also interested in attending that training, please feel free to register via our training page from our website. Now, in the chat box, in a couple of minutes, you should see a PDF of today's presentation, as well as a What's New in MAGS 12.0 PDF that illustrates all of the updates and enhancements being rolled out with this new version of MAGS. And lastly, our executive director, David Soule, will be here today. He will be monitoring the chat box. So if you have any questions, feel free to submit them through the chat box. We should also have some time at the end to address any outstanding questions as well. So at this point in time, just give me 1 minute. I'm going to pull up the new MAGS 12.0 application and we will go ahead and get started. Give me 1 second. All right, so you should be seeing the new login screen for MAGS version 12.0. So as you can see, this new format includes improvements to the overall appearance. You can see we have a new color scheme here. We also have new icons that you'll see throughout the application. Once I log into the home screen, you'll be able to see those. I also want to note that MAGS 12.0 will now display in a more mobile-friendly format to allow for a better user-friendly experience when you're accessing the application from devices other than a standard desktop or a laptop. So just starting with the login screen here, pretty self-explanatory. As we all know, everyone's user ID is going to start with a prefix that corresponds to their individual agency or jurisdiction. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly log in. If you ever have questions about user access, you can feel free to contact our help desk. All right, so after logging in, you are brought to the home screen here. From the home screen, this is where users can create a new worksheet, or you can view, edit, or delete an existing one. So just quickly pointing out those new icons that I just mentioned, you can see here this little pencil icon, that's going to be your edit icon. The trash can icon is your delete icon, and this download icon is how you're going to view a worksheet in the system. Now, it's always good to get in the habit of searching the system to make sure you're not initiating a duplicate worksheet. All of the search features are still the same, so you can still filter entirely by jurisdiction, by the state identification number for the defendant, the first name, last name, case number, or the worksheet ID number, which I'll talk about in a moment here. Now, worksheet ID number. I'm going to reiterate this a couple of times throughout the course of this presentation, so just bear with me, but I want to reiterate it because this is a common issue that we still see in MAGS. When you have multiple cases that are sentenced in front of the same judge on the same day, that means they constitute one sentencing event, meaning that one set of sentencing guidelines should be created for that event. So when you go to initiate the worksheet, you'd be clicking this Add New button one time. Even though there are multiple case numbers, you're clicking it one time. And then when you get to the list of offenses tab, that's where you add all of the unique case number information. We'll talk more about that once we get to that particular tab. But the reason I mentioned this is because if you initiate those worksheets separately, even though they are a part of the same sentencing event, it presents two issues. The first and biggest issue is that the judge is not presented with a proper overall guidelines range if they are initiated separately. The second issue comes in play when it comes to submitting the guidelines worksheet. So judges and their designees would be able to enter sentence information for those worksheets. They'd be able to successfully submit the first worksheet, but when they go to submit the second worksheet, they get a duplicate error message saying there's already been a worksheet submitted that contains the same SID number, date of birth, and date of sentence. So then they contact us. We have to combine those worksheets for them behind the scenes and email them back a revised PDF. So I mention all of that just to, again, reiterate the importance of making sure multiple criminal events, single sentencing event scenarios are initiated under one MAGS record. I'm going to quickly pull up a case here. So let's say I'm searching for a defendant, Thomas McWilliams. So you can see once I search for that defendant, I see two unique case numbers displaying here, the 1122 and the 2523. Both have the same sentencing date of May 23rd, 2014. And if I were to look to the worksheet ID column on this left-hand side here, we can see that they both share the same worksheet ID, that being the 160073. So this indicates that this multiple criminal event, single sentencing event scenario was initiated properly, since they all share this worksheet ID. So if I were to search by that worksheet ID field using this search feature, you would have both of these case numbers populate since they are linked to that same worksheet ID number. So if you have to search for these separate case numbers and you see them with different worksheet IDs, yet they are a part of the same sentencing event, that's an indicator that you have to go back and make sure you're combining those cases under one MAGS worksheet ID prior to sentencing. Okay. So I do want to point out one new reconsideration, modification, or three-judge review feature that we've added here. Let me go ahead and click on this icon so that we can follow along. I know the text is a little small, so just bear with me here. Now, a new worksheet shall be initiated in addition to original sentencings, rather. I'm sure we're all aware a new worksheet shall also be initiated for sentencing reconsiderations, modifications, or three-judge panel reviews, provided that they involve a crime of violence as defined under Criminal Law 14-101, and there is an adjustment made to the defendant's active sentence, that being the period of active incarceration as a result of that modification or review. Now, the guidelines for the sentence reconsideration, modification, or three-judge panel review, they shall be the same as they were for the original sentencing event. So for many of the state's attorneys who are here this afternoon, I'm sure you all are well aware that currently you all are basically initiating a new worksheet that replicates how the worksheet for the original sentencing event was calculated. However, this new feature is going to streamline that worksheet initiation process for any upcoming reconsideration, modification, or three-judge review involving a crime of violence, in that this feature will let you search for and copy the original guidelines worksheet that was submitted for the original sentencing event. So let me show you how this is going to work. I'm going to go ahead, let me erase my little search feature here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click this check mark here. So let's say I want to initiate a worksheet for an upcoming reconsideration, modification, or review that involves a crime of violence. Once I click this box here, we can see that most of the search fields are going to be grayed out and disabled. So you're not going to be able to search for them using those search features. However, you're going to search for this original worksheet via the case number. In most jurisdictions, you're going to be searching for an MDEC case number format. The exception being Baltimore City, since Baltimore City just recently onboarded with MDEC. For a while, you all will probably be searching for these older cases using that standard 9-digit format that you're familiar with. So I'm going to go ahead and just search for this test case that I created. So it's a C02CR231234. And then I'm going to click search. So once I click search here, you can see I get a response for a Jane Smith with that case number. I can see it was sentenced about a year ago on June 21st, 2023. If I look to the right-hand side, I see a little check mark under the submitted column. So that shows me that it was a worksheet that was submitted. Also, I can see clear as day with the text that says submitted, but I see this little copy icon next to it. So I'm just simply going to click that icon and it's going to ask me to confirm that I want to copy the worksheet. And I click OK. So once I do that, I'm brought to the offender information tab. And if I scroll down a little bit, you can see that most of the information on the offender information, offender score, list of offenses tab, it's all going to pre-populate with information that was submitted for the original guidelines worksheet. Most of these fields are going to be disabled. You're not going to be able to make edits to them. That's just to ensure that the guidelines remain as they were calculated for the original sentencing event. Also less work for you all if the majority of these fields are pre-populating with the same information. So you will need to fill in your worksheet preparer name. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with that. And then your title or agency. Now scrolling down, so we'll see here with regard to like PSI, representation, some fields do pre-populate with the information that was submitted on the original worksheet, but they are editable. That's because, it's possible the PSI status, representation, etc., has changed in advance of the reconsideration hearing. So you can make edits to certain fields. Now, jumping down to ethnicity and race, I do want to note that these two fields did not become mandatory in MAGS until 2019. So if you are copying a worksheet that had an original sentencing event prior to 2019, it's possible that the worksheet was submitted with these two fields blank. However, now that they are mandatory fields, you will be prompted to make selections for ethnicity and race. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save this page. And then I'm just going to quickly show you what the offender score. So you can see here that pre-populates with the information submitted on the original worksheet. However, none of this is editable. Same with the list of offenses tab. I can see that crime of violence, and I can see the original calculation for the guidelines. However, I can't add a new offense to it. I can't make edits to this particular offense. So the last tab that would need to be completed in advance of that reconsideration would be the victim information tab. So just as you would normally do for an original sentencing, if there's not a victim involved in the case, though most of these involves crime of violence, so there probably would be responses here. If you select no, all of these pre-populate with no. And if you select yes, we just ask that you make the appropriate selections that you normally do prior to sentencing. That said, it's possible with some of these fields that they won't be completed until post-sentencing, that being whether the victim was present at the hearing or gave a written or oral victim impact statement. So that would still, the judge or judge's designee would still be responsible for completing that information. Okay, so that's the new reconsideration modification feature. We hope that you all are excited for that feature. We're excited for it. Again, we think it's going to cut down and really streamline that entire worksheet initiation process when it comes to reconsiderations. So please take advantage of that. Now, that said, if you utilize that feature, search the system, and you don't see a worksheet that was submitted for the original sentencing event, you would simply click this Add New button just as you would for initiating a brand new worksheet. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through how to initiate a worksheet from scratch. We do have some participants who are new to MAGS, so I am going to walk through those steps. But again, I'm going to continue to highlight some new features along the way here. So let's say we search the system. I don't see a worksheet that I'm trying to initiate because again, we're really trying to avoid that issue of duplication. If you did search the system, found a worksheet that was already initiated for, this is particularly true with parole and probation agents. Sometimes they'll get a PSI order, they'll search the system and they'll see the state's attorney had already initiated the worksheet prior to knowing that a pre-sentence investigation was going to be ordered. So in that particular case, rather than duplicating a worksheet, we ask parole and probation to take a look at the calculation of the guidelines by the state. If they agree with the calculation, the worksheet can really remain as is. If there is any disagreement with regards to the guidelines calculation, we ask that the two parties have that conversation in hopes of reaching a consensus regarding the proper reflection of the guidelines. And if any changes need to be made to the worksheet that's already been initiated, they can make that change. So let's say I search the system, don't see any worksheet. I need to create the worksheet from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and click this Add New button. It's going to give me that alert, reminding me again to use the search feature to confirm that a worksheet has not already been initiated, and reminding me that only one worksheet should be created for multiple event or offense cases that are sentenced on the same day by the same judge. So I'm going to click OK here. All right, so again, I'm first brought to the Offender Information tab. This is pretty self-explanatory. This is, again, where we're entering information about the worksheet preparer, as well as some demographic information about the defendant. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter some basic information for a John Edward Smith, including the SID number, sex, date of birth, whether a pre-sentence investigation was ordered, jurisdiction, we'll select Baltimore County, representation, say public defender, ethnicity, no. And then I do want to note that race does allow for more than one response. So you can make several selections in this field here and then click Save this page. All right, so jumping forward to the offender score tab, I'm not going to go through the criteria that makes up each component of the offender score during this training. We'd be here for a while. But I do want to encourage everyone to utilize these information icons that you'll see throughout MAGS. If you click on this icon, it just gives you a more detailed explanation of what we're capturing in each particular field. So all of the information is taken directly from our manual. So again, if you ever need clarification, have a question, please utilize these information icons. But in a nutshell, the offender score captures basic components of an offender's prior criminal history. Now, Part A, relationship to the criminal justice system when the instant offense occurred. This is scored at the offense level, as it's possible that the score may differ between offenses that were committed on different dates. So we're going to score that when we get to the offense offender score screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and make selections for juvenile delinquency, prior adult criminal record, and then prior adult parole and probation violations. Now, one more feature I want to point out on this page is the decay factor here. I'm going to quickly click on this icon and just remind you all that Maryland does allow for what we refer to as the criminal record decay factor, meaning that if an offender has lived in the community for at least 10 years prior to the instant offense without criminal justice system involvement resulting from an adjudication of guilt, so let's say they've been off parole, probation, etc., for at least 10 years prior to this instant offense, their criminal record should be reduced by one level. So, for example, if it's initially calculated to be a major, it would be reduced to a moderate, and etc. So in this particular case, let's say I initially calculate the defendant's record to be a moderate, but I am applying the decay factor. So you can see once I check this radio button here, that jumps down to a minor. And then when we view the worksheet a little bit later on, you'll actually see on the hard copy of the worksheet the words decay factor in red to show that the decay factor was utilized. All right, so I'm clicking Save this page and close. So moving on to the List of Offenses tab. Going to reiterate once again, when you have those multiple cases that are sentenced as part of the same sentencing event, this is where you are going to enter all of that unique case number information. Now, in this test case that I'm creating, I'm going to create a case with 2 different criminal events with 4 adjudicated offenses total. So to start, I'm going to quickly click on this Add Offense button, which brings me to the Offense Offender Score screen. Now, beginning in the upper left-hand corner, we can see we have event number here. So I will note, when you are initiating a worksheet for a sentencing event that involves multiple cases, usually those unique case numbers, they occurred on different dates. And when offenses that occur on different dates are almost always considered separate criminal events. So when you have that multiple criminal event, single sentencing event scenario, you want to make sure you're properly noting the number of criminal events so that MAGS knows how to properly calculate that guidelines range. So in this test case, the first two offenses that I'm going to be adding to MAGS are going to be a part of criminal event number 1, corresponding to one case number that occurred on one offense date. The second set of offenses are going to correspond to a different case number that occurred on a separate offense date. So I'm going to make those part of criminal event number 2. So to start, I'm going to enter criminal event number 1. Now the count number, you should list the count number that the offense corresponds to as it's reflected on the indictment. So instead of going in sequential order 1, 2, 3, 4, make sure you're reflecting the count number that the offense corresponds to within the indictment. So let's say this is event number 1, count number 2. This occurred on March 1st of 2024. You can see case number here. This is going to pre-populate with an MDEC case number format based on the jurisdiction that you selected on the offender information tab. So any Baltimore City State's attorneys that may be attending today, you'll actually see this change starting July 1. It's going to populate with a C24CR prefix. However, it's still going to allow you, if you have an old case number format that you're initiating guidelines for, you can erase this MDEC prefix and enter that 9-digit format. It will still allow you to do that. But most jurisdictions are solely entering MDEC format at this point. So it's going to be C03CR. I'm going to enter a 2-digit filing year, followed by a 6-digit sequential number. Now, jumping down to offense title, there are 2 different ways you can search. You can click the most common offenses button, which brings you to our 25 most common guidelines eligible offenses. Or you can click the search button, which is going to bring you to our entire offense table. Now, within the table, you can search further by filtering by offense title, the CJIS code, the statute, or the type. So whether it's person, property, or drug here. Or you can simultaneously search all of those columns utilizing the search feature in the upper left-hand corner. So let's say I'm searching for an assault 1st degree, and I simply start by just typing in the word assault. You can see once I do that, every offense that contains the word assault is displayed here. And I can pretty quickly find assault 1st degree, so I'm going to click select. Once I do that, we can see MAGS populates the seriousness category, CJIS code, statute, the stat max, and if there were a mandatory minimum, that would populate here. Now, jumping down to these radio buttons, the attempt, conspiracy, and solicitation. So just as a reminder, generally any attempt, conspiracy, or solicitation to commit a given offense, it's going to be assigned the same seriousness category as the underlying offense. So in most cases, you would be selecting the underlying offense and then just selecting the appropriate radio button. For example, if this involved a conspiracy, I would just select it here. The exception to this rule comes into play with some of the more serious offenses, where an attempt, conspiracy, or solicitation may have a different seriousness category than that of the underlying offense. So an example of that coming into play with 1st degree murder. So you can see if I were to type in 1st degree murder here, you see we have separate entries for attempted, conspiracy, and solicitation. So let's say you wanted to enter an attempted 1st degree murder and then accidentally, just by habit, first selected murder 1st degree, and we're thinking of just selecting the attempt radio button. You can see that MAGS does not allow you to do that. So again, just a reminder with some of those more serious offenses to go back and make sure you're selecting the appropriate entry from the offense table. I'm going to jump this back to assault 1st degree. Now, moving on to enhancements, clicking on these drop downs. This is where you would add any additional enhancements. For example, if the defendant is convicted of a subsequent drug offense under criminal law 5-905 and by guidelines rule, their range doubles. Convicted of a subsequent crime of violence and subject to the 10, 25, or life mandatory minimum, or if they're a repeat sex offender and therefore subject to the life, that's where you would apply that enhancement here. So one new feature related to the multiple victim stacking rule, we're going to jump there. I'm just going to quickly go ahead and select yes, and then we're going to review the criteria for the stacking rule. Now, as a reminder, the multiple victim stacking rule can only be applied when there's a criminal event with multiple unique victims and not more than one seriousness category 1 or 2 offense. And in order for the upper guidelines limits to stack, this flag must be applied to at least 2 offenses within a given criminal event, each with a unique victim. So again, only one convicted offense per distinct victim may be used to calculate the overall guidelines range. And this new feature that we added states that when flagging an offense for the stacking rule, please indicate which unique victim is linked to the instant offense by selecting the appropriate victim number. So if I go ahead and click OK here, you can see that to the right-hand side, there's a drop-down under this question asking to which victim does this apply, and I see the drop-down here. Now I have several victim numbers. You would simply just start by entering victim or selecting rather victim number 1 here. And this really, we're receiving some feedback regarding the stacking rule. There was confusion over how many offenses you could apply the stacking rule to, each relating to the same victim. So hopefully this helps to eliminate confusion because you're clearly stacking one offense per victim here. So just make sure you're properly selecting that victim number. And then I'll show you when we view the worksheet, you'll actually see this victim number displayed on the PDF as well. All right, so jumping down to the offender score, I mentioned earlier that Part A, that relationship to the criminal justice system when the instant offense occurred, you would score that at the offense level. So I'm just going to select 0 here. And then we see B, C, and D of the offender score. That pre-populates with the information that I selected on that offender score tab. Once I make that selection for Part A, MAGS automatically calculates that offender score for me. Then jumping over to the offense score. Now, I'm sure we all know that the offense score needs to be completed for person offenses only. So those are offenses that typically involve victims, as well as weapon-related offenses. As you can see, MAGS will automatically calculate Part A, the seriousness category for you. And then you would just jump down and make selections for victim injury, weapon presence, and special victim vulnerability. Again, you can utilize these icons to give you further clarification. Similar to the offender score, once I make those selections, that total offense score is calculated here. So I'm going to click Calculate Guidelines Range. I'm going to save this page and close. All right, so there I have my adjudicated offense information for the assault first degree. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in a second assault first degree that's still corresponding to the same event number. So this is going to be event number 1, yet it's going to be count number 4. So it's going to have the same offense date as what I had just entered, as well as the same case number. So I mentioned this was an assault first degree. I can quickly select it from that most common offenses button. Now this assault involved a second victim. So I am also going to stack this offense for the multiple victim stacking rule. And you can see now victim number 1 is no longer an option. So I'm going to go ahead and select victim number 2, since this corresponds to the second victim in the criminal event. So jumping down, again, I make my selection for Part A of the offender score. And then quickly jumping back over to the offense score, I'm going to make selections for victim injury corresponding to this victim, weapon presence, and special victim vulnerability. And I'm going to click Calculate Guidelines Range, saving this page, and close. Okay, so we can see here I have my 2 adjudicated offenses for criminal event number 1. And we can see that MAGS did stack these upper limits for each offense involving a unique victim correctly, which brings that total overall guidelines range to 4 years to 18 years. Now, I'm going to go ahead and add a second criminal event that's going to be comprised of 2 drug-related offenses. So this is going to be a separate case number that occurred on a different date. So I am making this criminal event number 2, yet it's going to be count number 1 within this case number. So let's say this occurred about 2 weeks later on March 14th of 2024. And it's going to have a different case number. All right, so I am looking for a distribution of heroin. I'm selecting here. And then again, jumping down to the offender score. Now, this is a drug-related offense, so I don't need to enter anything relating to an offense score. I can simply jump down to Calculate Guidelines Range. And I'm going to save this page. All right, so the last offense I'm going to add is another drug-related offense that's corresponding to criminal event number 2. And let's say this is count 4. So again, has the same offense date and the same case number as what I just listed here. Okay, now this offense is going to be a knowingly violating criminal law article 5-602 with a mixture of fentanyl and heroin. So I'm going to search by the CGIS code here. All right, so here I have my offense. I'm going to go ahead and click select. Jumping down to the offender score, this is also a drug-related offense, so I'm just going to click Calculate Guidelines Range. Okay, so this is a new feature. This rule actually went into effect on February 1, and MAGS 12.0 now accounts for this scenario. I'm going to go ahead and click on this little information icon. We can see that once I clicked Calculate Guidelines Range for this particular offense, I get this drop down in alert saying, please select an offense for this to run consecutive to. If I click on this little icon, it states that to obtain the upper limit of the overall guidelines range for a criminal event with multiple offenses, and the sentence for one of these offenses is statutorily required to run consecutive to the sentence for another offense in the same criminal event, the person completing the sentencing guidelines shall add the upper limits of the guidelines ranges for the two eligible offenses whose sentences are required to run consecutive to one another. Now, I know that's a mouthful. So this particular offense, the knowingly violating criminal law 5-602, pursuant to criminal law article 5-608.1 subsection C, the sentence imposed for knowingly violating criminal law 5-602 with a mixture of fentanyl and heroin, the statute states that it shall be consecutive to and not concurrent with any other sentence imposed under any other provision of law. So based on this guidelines rule that went into effect on February 1, the upper limit for this offense with the mandatory consecutive sentence will need to be added to the upper limit for the eligible other offense within the same criminal event. In this case, it would be the distribution of heroin. Now, if this were the only offense in this criminal event, you wouldn't be prompted to link it to any other offense because there's not another offense within that criminal event to link it to. But in this particular case, there is, that being the distribution of heroin, which is why you're getting that alert message. So I'm going to show you two ways that you can go about linking these. If I were to click on this drop down now, you can see here that the other eligible offenses within the same criminal event populate. So I can see that distribution of heroin and I can link it directly from here. Now, let's say maybe you have another offense that you need to add to this criminal event that this offense should be linked to. That gives you like a higher upper guidelines limit. You can go ahead and click Save this page and close out. And you can see once I do that, MAGS will continue to give you this little alert message until you satisfy and link it to another eligible offense. So we can see here, it says, please address all of the offenses that have warnings. If I look to this knowingly violating offense, I see this little alert message appear in red here. So if I were to click on it, it's going to say the mandatory consecutive offense is missing. Would you like to select one? I'm going to click OK, and it brings you back to this offense offender score tab. And then again, I see this little drop down that's prompting me to link it to the eligible other offense. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and link it to the heroin. So we can see now the overall guidelines range for this sentencing event, it's 4.083 years to 20 years. And once I link it and click calculate guidelines range, we can see how that increases that upper limit to 21.5 years because it's adding that upper limit from this knowingly violating to the upper limit for the distribution of heroin. So just to note, this is only a select number of offenses that have this language within the statute. So this isn't going to be that common. But again, it's a new feature, so wanted to point it out. If you ever have questions about it, please feel free to contact our help desk. So I'm going to save this page and close. Okay, so here I have all of my adjudicated offense information. The last tab that we're going to complete is going to be the victim information tab prior to sentencing here. So I talked about this when I was entering the information for the reconsiderations. So I'm just going to quickly make these selections again that should be completed pre-sentencing. And then I'm clicking Save this page. Okay, so at this point in time, I've entered all of the necessary information pre-sentencing. I'm going to take a look at the worksheet here. So I'm going to click View Worksheet PDF. Okay, so a couple of additions that have been added to the PDF itself. So we can see here on the first page, I have my 2 assault first degrees that correspond to case number 1122. Now you can see we've also added the count number to the PDF that corresponds to each adjudicated offense that you're entering, as well as that victim number when you are utilizing the multiple victim stacking rules. So I can clearly see here that there were 2 different victims, and that is why the stacking rule was utilized. Now, jumping down to the left-hand side, the bottom, sorry, of the worksheet on the left-hand side, we've also added the worksheet ID number to the PDF. Just want to note that by guidelines rule, when you have multiple criminal events that are a part of the single sentencing event, by guidelines rule, each separate criminal event should correspond to their own worksheet. I get questions about this a lot because you see we have space for 3 adjudicated offenses on the worksheet. And sometimes people get confused and they say, I entered information for 4 offenses. I don't know why I'm not seeing the other offenses. I only see 1 or 2 on the worksheet. And I can immediately usually tell it's probably because there's a separate criminal event. And if you scroll down, you'll see the adjudicated offenses for the second criminal event. So we see each separate criminal event corresponding to their own worksheet. Each offense has their individual guidelines range. However, there is still one overall guidelines range calculated between all cases within the same criminal event. Now, the last thing I want to point out, just in case you have questions about it, so when you do have an offense that has a mandatory consecutive sentence, once you link those offenses within MAGS, on the sentence information tab, which majority of states' attorneys don't enter sentence information, that's typically done by judges and their designees. But that consecutive flag, it's going to pre-populate yes, since under statute, these sentences should be running consecutive to one another. So that's why you'll see this little consecutive flag on the PDF, indicating that these sentences should be running consecutively to one another. So at this point in time, that concludes my demonstration in MAGS. I want to check in, ask if there are any questions, if anyone wants me to review anything within the system. And then I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of resources that we'll have available to you on July 1. Dave, let me check in with you to see if there's anything we should address as well.
I think you covered everything, Catherine. I appreciate it. No additional questions in the chat room. I just attached a second time the PDF of the presentation and of the What's New in MAGS document. So if anyone joined late, I just want to put them back in the chat room.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me just quickly scroll, see if I see any hands raised. Okay, I don't see anything. Okay, really quick before I jump back to the presentation or the PowerPoint to talk about some resources, I do want to note this is particularly helpful for judges and their designees. If you know that an offense is going to be merged or null prossed, we do ask that it be removed from the guidelines worksheet. That is a guidelines rule. But sometimes judges and their designees get confused when they see merged or null prossed offenses still remaining on the guidelines worksheet, and they do have the ability to delete it themselves, but they feel more comfortable if the state's attorneys are deleting those offenses. So if an offense does end up being merged or null prossed, if you can quickly just jump to this list of offenses tab, and all you have to do, it's a quick click of a button. Let's say this knowingly violating offense ended up being merged or null prossed. You would just click this delete icon from the list of offenses tab to confirm that you want to delete it. And then if it happened to affect the overall guidelines range calculation, MAGS would automatically update that overall guidelines range for you. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, I'm going to quickly bring up my PowerPoint. Give me 1 second to pull that up, and then we'll wrap up with some resources here. Okay, so you should be seeing a screenshot of our MAGS homepage here. So I do want to note that on Monday, on July 1, we will be updating the MAGS user manual, MAGS frequently asked questions. We'll also have new instructional videos, all of which are going to pertain to the new MAGS 12.0. So if you need a refresher, if you have a colleague who wasn't able to attend, we really encourage you to utilize these instructional and support materials. They'll be extremely helpful. There's also going to be a recording of this webinar training. You will be able to access it via our training page here. So again, that could be useful for colleagues who weren't able to attend either one of these trainings. Lastly, I just want to note, if you have any MAGS or guidelines related questions, any questions about this deployment, you might have questions once it's officially deployed on July 1 and you get in there and start initiating guidelines worksheets. So please always feel free to reach out to us via phone 301-403-4165 or via email at msccsp@umd.edu. Those of you who do reach out on the regular, I'm the first point of contact for the commission. We're probably good friends at this point. So please always feel free to contact us with questions. We're here to help. So with that, I'll check in one more time. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask before we conclude?
Catherine, I do see Linda has her hand raised.
Yes, Linda, go ahead.
Yes, the consecutive, when you said to put it consecutive, how do we know it's consecutive sentencing? Because the person hasn't been sentenced yet.
By statute, we went through and there's about 10 offenses that the language in the statute specifies that the sentence for that particular offense must run consecutive to. The language varies depending on the offense, but in short, it needs to run consecutive to another eligible offense. So if you add one of those 10 offenses to MAGS and there is another eligible offense within that same criminal event, that's when MAGS is going to prompt you to link it so that it reflects the mandatory consecutive nature of the offense.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
It's a it's a very small subset of offenses, as Catherine pointed out, things like committing a crime of violence in the presence of a minor. And but we flag those in MAGS, so that'll help guide you in those instances. And by rule, the guidelines do have to get stacked to account for that fact that they require consecutive sentences. So that's why that feature has been added specifically.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. I'm not seeing anything else. So with that, thank you all for attending this afternoon. I hope it was helpful to get a little bit of a heads up in preparation for this deployment on Monday. Again, feel free to contact us with any questions, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Catherine.